The phone rang just as I sat down with my first cup of coffee. Early morning, sun barely up. The house still quiet in that comforting way it always is. Before the world remembers, it has demands. At 62, I'd grown to appreciate these quiet hours, the ones where nothing moves except the slow Arizona light crawling over my kitchen counters. So when the caller ID showed Mary Donnelly, my neighbor of 20 years, I almost didn't answer. Mary was many things: observant, opinionated, lonely. But she was not an early riser. If she was calling at 6:18 a.m., something was wrong. I answered. "Alan? Oh, thank God. I didn't wake you, did I?" Her voice trembled in that way she got when she was trying not to sound afraid. "No, Mary. What's going on?" A long pause. The kind that stretches too far. The kind that tells you the next words won't be good. "Alan, someone was in your backyard last night." I straightened in my chair. "What do you mean, someone?" "Not you," she said quickly. "A man. Tall, broad shoulders. Looked familiar, but I couldn't place it at first. I thought maybe it was your son-in-law. That Mark fella." My grip tightened around the coffee mug. Mark had stayed the night. Emily said he needed a break from work, needed time to breathe. I didn't like the man. Not really. But for Emily's sake, I tolerated him. "Mary," I said carefully, "you're sure it wasn't me you saw?" "Alan, I'm old. Not blind." Her voice dropped to a whisper. He wasn't alone. The refrigerator hummed behind me, suddenly too loud. "What do you mean?" She inhaled shakily. "There was a woman with him. Not Emily. Tall. Red hair. They were close. Holding each other. Kissing. I saw them go behind your shed." The room shifted, like the air had thinned. I stared out the window toward my backyard, calm and empty in the morning light. Last night, Mark had said he was stepping out for fresh air. I thought nothing of it. Now Mary's words hung in my kitchen like smoke. "Alan," she whispered, "I wouldn't have said anything if I wasn't certain. You need to see for yourself." I swallowed the bitterness rising up in my throat. "I'll come by in a minute." She exhaled loudly, relieved. "I'm sorry, Alan. Truly." I hung up and sat there for a long moment, coffee cooling in my hands, the edges of my peaceful morning collapsing one by one. Mark, my son-in-law, in my yard, with another woman. The day had just begun. And already it felt wrong. Mary answered the door, before I even knocked. Her white hair was pinned back, in a way that told me she'd been pacing. She clutched her robe tightly around her shoulders, eyes darting past me, as if expecting that mysterious couple to be standing in my driveway. "Come in, Alan," she said, voice thin. "I made coffee, though I doubt either of us needs more." Her living room smelled like cinnamon and old furniture polish, same as always. Yet the tension hanging in the air made everything feel sharper, unsettling. She motioned for me to sit, but she remained standing, wringing her hands in that nervous, bird-like way of hers. "Tell me exactly what you saw," I said. Mary nodded several times, more to herself than to me. It was late, around 11, maybe a little after. I'd fallen asleep in my chair with the television on. When I woke, the light in your yard caught my eye. "Thought maybe you were out there checking something." She glanced toward her window. "But it wasn't you." I waited, jaw tight. "It was Mark," she whispered. I recognized his walk. He had that careless way about him, like he owned the place. She hesitated, swallowing. But that wasn't the worst part. I already knew where this was going, but hearing it was something else entirely. "The woman," she continued. "She came up behind him. Red hair. Long. Curled. She put her arms around him, and he turned and kissed her like—" Mary shook her head. "Like they'd done it 100 times. No hesitation. No guilt." My chest tightened. Emily's face flashed in my mind, sweet, loyal Emily, who defended Mark, even when he didn't deserve it. "Are you sure?" I asked quietly. Mary raised her chin. "Alan, I may forget where I put my reading glasses, but I know what a kiss looks like." They held each other, whispered something I couldn't hear, and then, she pointed toward my backyard. "They walked behind your shed. They were gone maybe 10 minutes. When they came back out, they were laughing." She covered her mouth like she didn't want anyone to hear. The room felt too small, too warm, too real. "I didn't imagine it," she added firmly, as if reading my hesitation. "I wouldn't have called you if I wasn't absolutely certain." I stood slowly. "Thank you, Mary." She touched my arm gently. "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer. I didn't know. All I knew was that something dark had started moving just beneath the surface of my family. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly afraid of what I might find if I dug deeper. By the time I stepped back into my own yard, the sun was fully up, casting long shadows across the gravel and the patchy grass I kept meaning to reseed. Funny how normal everything looked. As if last night had been just another quiet evening in a quiet man's life. But Mary's words clung to me, burrowing deeper with every step toward the shed. I walked slowly, scanning the yard the way I used to inspect wiring. Careful, methodical, looking for what didn't belong. The shed stood at the back corner of the property, under the old mesquite tree that had survived every storm nature threw at it. The sight of it, usually comforting, felt different now. Wrong. Too still. Too watched. The ground behind it caught my attention first. The dirt there was darker, turned over in a way that didn't match the rest of the yard. Kneeling, my knees cracking the way they always do now, I brushed the loose soil aside with my fingers. Something caught the morning light. A small gold earring, delicate, twisted in a way that suggested it had been pulled off quickly. Not Emily's style. Not something she'd ever wear. My stomach tightened. Beside it, half buried, was a tissue stained with dark red lipstick. Not the light pink shade Emily used, but a bold, confident color. A stranger's color. A woman who fit Mary's description perfectly. I straightened slowly, the air pressing heavy against my chest. That should have been enough. More than enough. But something else pulled my attention. A footprint. Faint, but clear enough in the bent grass. Too small for Mark, too large for Emily. The imprint of a heeled boot. I followed the line of prints until they led me directly to the shed door, and that was when I felt the first true jolt of fear. The padlock hung crooked, not snapped shut. The door was open just an inch, just enough for a breeze to nudge it. I always locked it. Always. I pushed the door open. The familiar smell of wood and motor oil hit me, but something else was off. A small plastic bin I kept on the shelf. Screws and bolts, arranged neatly by size, lay on its side. Contents spilled across the floor. Fresh disturbance. Not an accident. Not an animal. Someone had been inside. Someone who wasn't supposed to be. I stepped back, heart thudding. There was no denying it now. Mark had brought that woman here, into my yard, into my shed, into the one place that was mine alone. And whatever they were doing behind that shed last night, it wasn't innocent. Emily showed up around 10, still in her scrubs, hair pulled back in a loose bun the way she wore it after long nursing shifts. She looked tired, but she always did lately. Too many hours, too much emotional labor, too much bending herself around Mark's moods. I tried to smile as she walked into the kitchen, but I caught myself studying her, really studying her, in a way that made my own chest ache. She deserved better than this. "Morning, Dad," she said, dropping her bag by the counter. "Thought I'd stop by before heading home. You look pale. Everything okay?" "Fine," I lied, pouring her a cup of coffee. My hands trembled just enough for her to notice, but she didn't comment. She never pushed. She got that from her mother. "How was your shift?" I asked, stalling. She sighed. "Long. We had a full house last night. Mark wanted to come with me this morning, but he said he needed a walk to clear his head first." My jaw tightened. There it was. The cover story. "A walk?" I repeated. "Yeah," she said lightly, smiling as she sat at the table. "He's been stressed with work. The dealership's been slow." She said the word stressed, the way she always did when talking about him, soft, protective, as if shielding him from a world he refused to face. I wanted to tell her everything. The earring, the lipstick, the open shed, the late-night whispers, but her smile held something so fragile, so hopeful, that the words stuck in my throat. "Did he say where he walked?" I asked casually, trying not to sound like I was interrogating her. She shook her head. "No, but you know Mark. He's restless. Wanders when he's anxious. Wanders." That was one word for it. "Cheats in my backyard" was another. Emily reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. Her touch was warm, familiar. "Dad, is something wrong? You seem off." I looked at her, really looked, at the kindness in her eyes, the trust she carried like a weight she didn't know she was holding. She didn't deserve the truth, not yet, not without proof so solid no one could twist it. "Just tired," I said finally. "Didn't sleep well." She nodded, accepting the explanation without hesitation. Blind trust, painful trust. As she sipped her coffee, talking about her patients and weekend plans, I felt something inside me harden. For Emily's sake, I needed certainty. Evidence Mark couldn't explain away. Proof strong enough to break the illusion without destroying her completely. And I knew exactly where to start looking. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house breathe around me. Air vents clicking, wood settling, the faint hum of the refrigerator carrying down the hallway. I kept replaying the morning in my head. The earring, the lipstick, the open shed. Evidence scattered in my yard like breadcrumbs, leading to a truth I didn't want to face. But the truth didn't care what I wanted. It came for me anyway around midnight. At first it was just a sound, a whisper, the kind you might mistake for wind if the night wasn't so still. Then, a soft giggle. A woman's. I sat up, heart thudding. The window above my bed looked directly into the backyard. I pushed the curtain aside. Under the pale wash of moonlight, I saw two figures standing near the shed. Mark's posture was unmistakable. Hands in his pockets, head tilted. That lazy confidence he wore like a jacket 2 sizes too big. And beside him, close enough their shoulders touched, was a woman, with bright red hair, vivid, even in the dim light. She leaned into him, laughing behind her hand like a teenager sneaking out after curfew. My jaw clenched so hard I felt something pop. They spoke in low voices, the kind lovers use when the world isn't supposed to know they exist. Then Mark placed his hand on her back and guided her behind the shed. The same place Mary had described. The same place I'd found evidence hours before. Something in me snapped. I shoved on my shoes, didn't bother with a jacket, and stomped out the back door. The cold air hit me like a slap. I didn't try to be quiet. I didn't care if they heard me. "Mark!" I barked as I crossed the yard. But by the time I rounded the shed, they were already slipping through the side gate, the metal latch clanging behind them. Cowards, running into the night. I stood there in the dark, breath heavy, pulse furious. Something glinted in the dirt. I bent down and picked it up. A small glass perfume bottle, cold in my hand. Fancy, expensive. Engraved with 2 initials. R. F. Not Emily's. Not even close. I closed my fist around it. Mark wasn't just cheating. He was stupid enough to do it in my yard. And I was done watching quietly. The days that followed were a study in performance. Mark's, not mine. I barely slept, running on bitter coffee and sharper instincts. But Mark strutted around my house like nothing had happened. Like midnight rendezvous were as normal as morning toast. He became overly helpful, the kind of helpful that made my skin crawl. Need anything from the store, Alan? See, Alan. He'd ask every time he came into the kitchen. I can take care of that for you, Alan. Let me help you with that, Alan. He'd never said my name so much in his life. He hovered, smiling too wide, standing too close, talking too sweet. Guilty men always overperform. And Emily, God bless her, looked more exhausted than ever. Dark circles under her eyes, shoulders slumped, stress clinging to her like a second skin. She tried to brush it off, telling me things were getting better between them, that Mark was trying harder. I nearly laughed every time she said it. The man was cheating while she worked double shifts to support him, and he had the nerve to act like a devoted husband in front of her, in front of me. But the biggest tell came from his phone. Mark was never without it. He kept it glued to him, like it held the secrets to life itself, which, in a way, it did. I noticed the pattern quickly. The phone would buzz. He'd look at the screen and smile, an involuntary, private smile Emily never prompted. He'd get up abruptly, mutter, "Work call," and step outside. He'd return 5 minutes later, smelling faintly of cigarette smoke and cheap perfume. The number was always listed as work. I knew better. Mark hadn't received a legitimate work call in months. The dealership barely kept him on. One evening, while he and Emily watched TV, his phone lit up on the coffee table. He'd left it unlocked for once. Just for a second. A message preview appeared. R.F. Same time tonight. My blood ran cold. R.F. etched on the perfume bottle. Red hair. The woman in my yard. The pieces clicked into place with a precision that felt cruel. I didn't touch the phone. Didn't need to. I'd seen more than enough. Mark walked back into the room, completely unaware, cracking open a beer like he hadn't been sneaking around my property at midnight with another man's wife. I leaned back in my chair, watching him, feeling the quiet burn of resolve settle in my chest. If Mark thought he was going to break my daughter's heart under my roof, he had no idea who he was dealing with, and I was far from finished collecting evidence. By the next afternoon, I'd made up my mind. Whatever Mark thought he was getting away with, he was doing it on my property. And I wasn't about to rely on Mary's eyesight, or my own late-night glimpses to prove it. I drove to the hardware store, bought 2 motion-activated cameras, and installed them facing the shed, one on the back porch, one on the side of the house angled toward the mesquite tree. They were small, discreet, nothing anyone would notice in the dark. I tested them twice, then 3 times, making sure the feed connected cleanly to my laptop. At 62, I wasn't as fast with technology as I used to be, but I learned what I needed. Desperation has a way of sharpening the mind. That night, I brewed coffee I didn't need, sat at my kitchen table, and waited. Hours passed. Silence. A coyote yipped somewhere in the distance. Then, at 12:43 a.m., my laptop chimed. Motion detected. I clicked the notification, and the grainy nighttime footage filled the screen. Mark appeared first, walking with that same careless swagger he always had. He moved straight toward the shed door, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a key. A spare key. To my shed. He didn't hesitate. He unlocked it like he'd done it 100 times before. 30 seconds later, the red-haired woman slipped into view, her hair shining even in the low light. She glanced over her shoulder, then ducked inside after him. The camera caught the moment the door closed. I sat there, breath tight, waiting for any movement. 90 seconds passed. Then the door creaked open again. Mark and the woman emerged, tangled together, kissing like teenagers who thought they were invincible. Her hands looped around his neck. His fingers dug into her waist. My stomach twisted. I watched the entire clip in silence. When it ended, I watched it again, and then again. 3 times, each replay worse than the last. The betrayal wasn't mine, but it felt like a punch to the chest all the same. Emily, my Emily, working exhausting shifts, loving Mark with everything she had, defending him even when he didn't deserve an ounce of it. And there he was, using my daughter's trust the way he used my yard, carelessly, without respect, without shame. Rage simmered beneath my ribs, slow and steady, not the kind that burned wild, but the kind that made a man cold, focused, calculating. Emily didn't deserve this, and I wasn't letting him get away with it. By the next evening, I was ready to confront him. I had the footage saved, the perfume bottle tucked in my desk, the earring sealed in a small plastic bag. Proof, undeniable, unshakable. But Mark had one more surprise in him. I was in my office around 11 p.m., laptop open, trying to decide how to break the truth to Emily without shattering her completely. That was when the camera alert pinged again. Motion detected. My pulse kicked up as I opened the feed. The back gate creaked. Mark stepped inside, glancing around like a man checking for witnesses. A moment later, the red-haired woman followed, clutching something wrapped in a dark blanket. They moved quickly, too quickly for lovers' meeting, more like criminals finishing a job. I watched as Mark knelt behind the shed and began digging. The woman handed him the blanket. He unfolded it, revealing an object that glinted under the porch light, an expensive wine bottle, the kind Mark couldn't afford even on his best day. They placed it gently into the shallow hole. Then came the blanket itself, smoothed out, folded carefully, almost ritualistic. Lastly, the woman pulled something from her purse, a small envelope, and tucked it inside the folds before they covered everything with dirt. I leaned in toward the screen, breath caught in my throat. What the hell were they burying? Why here? Why in my yard? When they finished, they kissed, long, familiar, practiced, before disappearing through the side gate once more. I grabbed a flashlight and headed out the moment the gate clicked shut. The night air was cold, sharper than usual, carrying the kind of silence that feels like it's listening. I reached the spot behind the shed and dropped to my knees. The soil was still loose, fresh. I dug with my hands, urgency turning into something close to fury. Within seconds, I uncovered the wine bottle, dusty but intact. A label written in French, price tag still clinging to the underside. Ridiculous. Then the blanket, soft, expensive fabric I didn't recognize. Inside it, the envelope. I opened it carefully. A handwritten note, looping cursive, floral perfume still clinging to the paper. M. I miss you already. Same place next week. R. My hands shook as I read it again. Not a one-time mistake. Not a moment of weakness. A meeting place. A routine. For months. They chose my yard. The yard. My wife and I once tended to play out their affair, like it was their personal stage. I stared at the dirt under my nails. The note in my hand. The evidence spread across the ground. Whatever happened next, Mark had no idea the storm that was coming for him. I didn't sleep that night. Not after finding the wine bottle, the blanket, the note. Not after watching Mark behave like my backyard was some kind of lover's motel. I sat at the kitchen table with the perfume bottle beside me, its glass catching the early dawn light. R. F. 2 initials. Whoever she was, she had money and bold taste. Nothing about her matched the women in our neighborhood. But the note had. R. I opened my laptop and typed a simple search. Paradise Valley missing red-haired woman. Nothing. I tried red-haired woman. R. F. Arizona. Still, nothing. Then I changed tactics. I opened the neighborhood directory that our HOA sent every year. I scanned the names, until I found one that made my pulse thud a little harder. Rachel Foster. 2 streets over. Married. Mid-30 seconds. Red hair in the small picture beside her name. I sat back, exhaling slowly. It couldn't be that easy. But sometimes, the truth doesn't hide. It just waits for you to look. I debated for a long moment before dialing the number listed under David and Rachel Foster. A man answered, voice groggy and irritated. Yeah? David, I said, steadying myself. This is Alan Pierce. We've met a couple of times at HOA meetings. A pause. Oh, hey. It's early. Everything okay? I'm sorry to bother you, I said. But I need to ask about your wife. Silence sharpened on the other end. What about her? I hesitated, choosing my words with care. Does she know someone named Mark? A heavy exhale. Know someone named Mark. So you've seen something too. The ache in his voice told me everything before he said a word. Our marriage is hanging by a thread, he confessed quietly. She's been coming home late, says she's been working. But she's a florist, not a doctor. I'm not stupid. My throat tightened. I have reason to believe she's been seeing my son-in-law. A long, pained pause. Mark? The guy with the silver truck? That's him. Jesus, he whispered. That fits. She got a text last week from someone saved as M. She said it was a vendor. He laughed bitterly. I guess we're both idiots. Not idiots, I murmured. Just deceived. He let out a breath. What do we do now? We get proof, I said. Then we end it. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't alone. And neither was he. 2 men blindsided by the same pair of liars. 2 men about to put an end to it. Together, I chose a Saturday afternoon for the confrontation, broad daylight, no shadows for anyone to hide behind. I called Emily first, asked her to come over. She sounded cheerful, unaware her world was about to collapse. Mark followed 20 minutes later, oblivious as ever, kissing her cheek like a man who deserved affection he hadn't earned in months. Rachel and David arrived shortly after. Rachel stiffened when she saw Mark on my porch. Mark froze when he saw Rachel beside her husband. Their eyes locked, a silent confession passing between them. Emily glanced between them, confused. What's going on? She whispered. I stepped aside and gestured toward the dining room. Everyone inside. They filed in slowly, Emily anxious, Rachel pale, David tight-jawed, and Mark trying to plaster innocence onto his face like a cheap sticker peeling at the edges. The laptop waited on the table. Screen dark. Alan, Mark said with a weak laugh. What is this? Some kind of intervention? Something like that, I replied. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't either. I clicked play. The room fell silent as the footage from the motion cameras filled the screen. Mark, entering my yard. The red-haired woman behind him. The shed door opening. Their bodies pressed together inside. Mark's hand on her waist. Rachel's fingers curled in his jacket. The kiss. The embrace. The escape. Emily's gasp cut through the room like broken glass. Rachel covered her face, sobbing immediately. David clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles blanched white. And Mark started talking. Of course he did. This isn't what it looks like, he blurted. That camera angle. It's misleading. Misleading? David snapped. You were kissing my wife. No. It was a moment of weakness. We were drunk. Rachel lifted her head, tears streaking her makeup. We weren't drunk, Mark. Mark's face twisted. He looked at me next. Alan, you have no right to spy on your own family. You, I said quietly, were in my yard. With someone who wasn't my daughter. He shut up fast. Emily stood perfectly still, as if one wrong breath would shatter her entirely. Her hands shook as she backed away from him. You used my dad's yard? Her voice cracked. Our family? Our home? Mark reached for her. Emily, baby, listen. I can explain. She recoiled like he'd burned her. Don't touch me. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. I didn't intervene. I didn't speak. This wasn't my moment. This was hers. Her moment, to see the truth without anyone softening the blow, the truth her heart deserved. Painful as it was. The truth her husband had buried behind my shed. Mark moved out that same night, carrying his duffel bag like a man heading into exile, though exile would have been kinder than what he deserved. Emily didn't speak to him, not a word. She stood on the porch beside me, arms wrapped around herself, watching the man she'd married walk down the driveway without looking back. When his truck finally disappeared, she let out a sound I'll never forget. Part sob, part relief, part disbelief that the person she'd built a future with had been nothing more than a liar wearing a wedding band. She filed for divorce the next morning. No hesitation. No last chances. No weak spots left to exploit. Rachel left too, returning to her parents' home in Flagstaff. David told me later that she confessed everything. That she regretted it. That she'd thrown away her marriage for a man who couldn't stay loyal for the length of a TV commercial. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not really. But I did feel a strange, quiet solidarity with David. Two men who'd watched the people they cared about betray them in the same shadowed corner of the same yard. For days afterward, the shed felt tainted. The ground behind it, a reminder of all the secrets buried beneath my own nose. I dug up every trace of their meetings, every bottle, every blanket fiber, every scrap of evidence that marked my property as their playground. I scrubbed the shed from top to bottom, reorganized every shelf. Then I installed a full fence around the yard, higher and stronger than before. A line. A boundary. Something that should have been there all along. Emily stayed with me for a month, moving back into her old room like she'd never left. Some days, she cried. Some days she didn't speak at all. Some nights, she sat beside me on the couch, leaning her head on my shoulder, the same way she did when she was little, as if she needed to borrow some strength just to stay upright. And in the quiet moments, when the house settled around us, and the desert wind moved through the mesquite tree, I felt the weight of 62 years pressing down on me. Aging wasn't the hard part. Loneliness wasn't either. The hardest part was realizing how fast everything can change, how betrayal can slip silently into your home without knocking. But protecting Emily, being there for her, that still mattered. That still gave me purpose. On a cool evening a month later, we sat together on the front porch. No words. No pain lingering in the air. Just two people rebuilding, one quiet breath at a time. And for the first time in a long while, the world felt steady again. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.